How do you feel when you watch Chelsea play? Do you feel an emotional connection to them? Or do you just look at your bank account, see the reported $285 million and just feel warm and smile? I'm genuinely delighted to welcome my next guest. I mean, Brighton and Hove Albion are, to me, they're all that's good about football and about life. A Premier League team punching way above its weight because of smarts and data, a willingness to think differently, brilliantly in so many facets: leadership, scouting, recruitment. So that in a football world that's too often predetermined solely by money and nation states and the power of the wallet translating to points in the table, Brighton have bucked that trend, which is amazing when you truly understand their history, because it's been some journey. In the late 1990s, Brighton were almost liquidated. They almost fell into non-league football. They almost disappointed Fat Boy Slim. But what's happened since? It's nothing short of astonishing. They've risen stronger, harder, and so much smarter than all around them. And I've invited my guest on so that fans of all clubs can learn from their approach. I've got to say, as an Everton fan, I can only shake my head when I watch Brighton and wonder if such sanity and strategy should even be legal in football. If you want to understand how leadership, strategy, mission alignment, this is more than football. I mean, ultimately, this is about your jobs, your reality, your thinking, but how you can make memories through football that will last forever, aka 6th place last season, qualification for Europe for the first time in the club's 122-year history. Listen to today's guest. He's the club's chief executive. Massive reason why Brighton have been such a marvel. Their recruiting strategy borders on sorcery, and why they've just registered an English record-setting profit, for a conversation about how to get ahead in Premier League football by doing more than just trying. Welcome, Mr. Paul Barber.
Thanks, Rog. I think we should stop there. That was perfect. I don't think I can improve on that.
Paul, I'm exhausted, so it is all down to you from here on in. And I do want to understand how Brighton do what they do. But we should start by talking about you, because you've had an incredible career journey. You're 57. Your LinkedIn highlights include 4 years as a director of marketing for the English Football Association, half-decade in North London as an executive director, I'll whisper this, of Spurs, before you crossed the Atlantic and you joined then second-tier Vancouver Whitecaps chief executive officer in 2009 as they became part of Major League Soccer, before you arrived as chief executive of Brighton in 2012. Can you talk about that career climb and what you were always striving professionally to work towards?
First of all, I've always loved football. Soccer, it's always been my first love. I was lucky enough to play until I was in my mid-30s, and wasn't good enough to play at the highest level or make a proper living from the game as a player. But that's where it started, really, the love of the game. I coached, refereed, always wanted to work in professional football, but studied marketing, worked through some big organizations before getting into professional football in sort of the mid-1990s, early 1997. And that's where I've been ever since. So I would like to say it's been a concerted plan, but as always with careers, you need a bit of luck and you need sponsors and mentors along the way. And I've been fortunate enough to have a little bit of all of that. And, the last 26, 27 years in football have given me, some of the happiest times of my life, let alone my career. So, I consider myself to be very fortunate.
You arrived at Brighton May 2012. We've got to make this clear. They were a world away from the strategy monster machine we now know and love. Brighton was a club that had just finished 10th in the Championship. In fact, 15 years earlier, they'd almost gone bankrupt. They spent time homeless, fans collecting coins in buckets, saving them, as a club won a draw on the last day of the season to avoid being relegated out of the entire Football League. And you joined Brighton 3 years after property investor, professional poker player, entrepreneur, the quite remarkable and enigmatic Tony Bloom became chairman of the club. He bought 75% stake in Brighton. He'd supported them his entire life. I think he'd started going to games as an 8-year-old. Personally handed over $100 million plus to pay for the construction of the Amex Stadium, that cauldron, set a goal for Brighton to get promoted first to the Championship, and then he'd set course for the Premier League in his mind, and then he wanted to finish top 10, which, by the way, spoiler alert, Brighton have done 2 years in a row. But we've got to make clear, when you joined This was all pipe dream fantasy, Paul. Your first full season at the club, I think 2012-13, you came fourth in the Championship. You lost in the semi-final playoffs to Crystal Palace. Forever, the Johnny Lawrence to Brighton's Daniel Russo. And the year ended with a messy breakup with then-manager Gus Poyet, who was suspended at the end of the season before being let go. Did it really feel that you were going to be able to do this Tony Bloom pipe dream, or did it feel a bit like me saying I'd like to be quarterback for the Chicago Bears, or I'd like to be a supermodel?
Well, first of all, one of the key reasons I joined Brighton was Tony Bloom. He had a very clear vision for the club. He had strong values, both as a person and as a businessman. And I could relate not only to the values, but also the vision that he had for the club, which was to try and make us, first of all, a Premier League club, which in the end took 5 years. And then once we got into the Premier League, to stay in the Premier League, which is a very hard thing to do if you, as you know, Rog, coming through the divisions as a relatively small club with small crowds relative to some of the big clubs, it's hard to do. And then from there, we wanted to progress to be a top 10 club and then qualify for Europe. So I bought into the dream, I bought into the vision, and I felt that the experience that I'd gained over the years, both in the corporate world and earlier in my football career in the football world, that I could add something to that dream and hopefully bring it alive for Tony.
I mean, here's the truth about the Premier League. You know this, I think most of our listeners do. Success, trophies, top 4 places, they correlate, give or take, pretty much to the financial might of clubs. Wage bills lead to glory. At some point, we're all just cheering for Excel spreadsheets. And Brighton is an incredible town. Go there if you can when you're in England, listeners. It is a truly progressive, a singular seaside town. It's Fatboy Slim sponsoring the team shirt wonder. But if you are not a London club, you do not have the instant commercial might of the capital city, and you never will. Brighton is not sovereign state-owned. Tony Bloom, to the best of my knowledge, is not an oligarch. You've got a built-in disadvantage to being long-term competitive, essentially. Your wage bill in the Premier League is, I believe, the 6th smallest. So your dream, essentially, of being a little dog that barks and fights like a big dog, you had to think differently. Essentially, you were always, and you still are, going to be swimming upstream constantly against a very strong current.
Yeah, that's true. And we first of all, I think, you have to have a clear vision if you want to take on organizations bigger than yourselves. And in football, there's certainly a lot bigger than us. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a means of actually delivering that vision, and you have to be able to communicate it to the staff, bring those staff with you. You need talented people, and we're fortunate in the club that we've been able to hire and retain a lot of talented people, both on and off the pitch. And, it goes back to Tony. You need an owner that's prepared to back you financially, because although Tony isn't an oligarch and he's not a nation state, he has still pumped in nearly £500 million into the club over the years. But we've invested that wisely. We've put that into infrastructure. So we've got a world-class stadium that we fill every week. We've got a world-class training facility, which is literally amongst the best in the world for football clubs, soccer clubs. And we've been able to be smart with our recruitment of players, and we use a lot of data to do that. We don't pay crazy wages. We don't pay crazy transfer fees. We try and find value by fishing in ponds in the world that other clubs are not even looking in, let alone fishing in. And that's an important part of our strategy.
I'm interested in the first steps you took for this cultural change. Where do you even know where to begin when you had this big vision, but you also have your reality? How do you identify the first levers of change?
I think, first of all, when you stand up in front of all of your staff and you communicate the vision for the first time, you get a sense of who believes it, who maybe needs a little bit more convincing to believe it. And then you know the people that are never going to get it and never going to believe it. And so you have to take some pretty tough decisions early on, that you want to keep that first group and you want to energize them because they become your disciples. You want to convince the second group to come along with you because you sense that they could come along with you, and they will come along with you if you can just give them that little bit of an extra reason. And then, frankly, the third group, you just have to move on pretty quickly, because you can't afford to have anyone weighing you down or holding you back during those first few months of change. And we did that very early. We took those tough decisions. We replaced those people that didn't want to believe or didn't want to be part of the journey with people that did. And then we started to get a bit of momentum. In that first season, we did finish fourth. We did make the playoffs. People could see that it wasn't such a pipe dream to get to the Premier League. We fell just short. We did the same again the following season. We fell just short again. We finished sixth, got to the playoff semi-finals again, missed out again. And it was only really in the third season that we had a tough season. And the third season was a period of transition where we changed coaches. The coach didn't work out. We had to change again mid-season. We stabilized in that third season. And in the fourth season, we did it again. We went all the way to the playoffs. We failed again. But this time we got really close. We missed out on going up automatically on goal difference. And it was a blow to all of us, but it was also a spur, an energy to carry on into the fifth season when actually we did finally get promoted automatically to the Premier League.
I'm fascinated by this whole conversation. That third group, the group you've got to get rid of, essentially, if you want to know what happens to those people, dear listeners, they get sold to Chelsea. But we talk a lot in football about alignment. It's a buzzword. It's thrown around. No one really understands it. I look at what you've done. I mean, you always talk about Tony and then onwards through the organisation. It is at the heart of what you set out to achieve. So how do you define it?
Well, alignment's really important because you have to have everyone pulling in the same direction in any organisation. And in a professional sports organisation, it's more important than ever for a couple of reasons. First of all, you need people to believe in order to support the athletes on the field. You know, the organisation itself has got to be aligned in order for the athletes to have any chance of success. And then secondly, you need that momentum that alignment gives, because every time you have a setback, the alignment allows you to overcome it quickly, to build resilience from it, to actually become stronger, not weaker. And that's what happened with us. Every time we faced a setback in those early seasons when we were trying to get to the Premier League, it made us stronger, not weaker. It made the belief stronger, not weaker. It created a sense of, we can do this, we will do this. It's just a question of when rather than if. And that's powerful in any organisation, but particularly in a football club.
I want to talk about leadership, Paul, in terms of management, because when I first met you, it was in 2007, 6 seasons in the Championship, 4 managers in that time, as you've outlined, including a wonderful 6-month fever dream when the club was led by former Liverpool defender Sami Hyypiä. Then manager Chris Hughton delivered your long-suffering Seagulls back to the promised land, promotion to the Premier League, a 2-1 win over Wigan earns it. But your club was still a world away from the tactically cutting-edge creature that we know today. 17th place finish in 2018-19 in the Premier League. You hired 44-year-old Graham Potter from Swansea City. Graham's arrival, his tactical flexibility, his shape-shifting formations, that front foot approach, one that empowered Lewis Dunk and Big Dan Burn to build from the back so Neil Maupay could finish. Yes, that happened. They were transformative. Strategically, what did you realise your hyper-efficient club needed in a manager?
Well, I think the first thing we realised after 2 seasons in the Premier League with Chris Hughton had done a fantastic job, not only getting us out of the Premier League, but stabilising us in those first 2 seasons in the Premier League. But we weren't playing very attractive football. We were surviving. We weren't thriving. And I think one of the things that is very common in North America is an awareness that professional sport is part of the entertainment industry. In the UK and Europe, it doesn't tend to be viewed like that all the time. We felt that not only did we need to survive and thrive, but we needed to entertain. And we felt that in Graham Potter, we could hire a coach that would not only thrive in the Premier League, but he would help entertain in the Premier League. But he had a particular methodology. He told us it was going to take time to get our squad of players to perform in the way that he expected them to and wanted them to, and that would be entertaining. And we needed to give him that time, and we did. And in that first season with Graham in charge, you know, the football was much better. The results improved slightly. The position in the standings improved slightly. But we still weren't achieving what we felt we were capable of achieving. But as time moved on with Graham, the second season became better again. And in the third season, it really clicked.
Do you understand what that was?
It was patience. It was giving a coach the opportunity to work with the players, to get them to believe in his methodology, to get them to believe in themselves, to give them confidence that they were good enough not only to play and compete in the Premier League, but entertain in the Premier League, to beat some of the bigger clubs in the Premier League. And I think once that belief was instilled, we had it in other parts of the organisation, but once it was instilled in the playing squad, then we started to see results improve. And as I say, it took in the end 3 seasons for that to happen, but it happened.
Another aspect of Brighton's rise has been the scouting and recruitment. Brighton's squad building over the past 5 years, honestly, it's had the touch of the Warren Buffetts about it, Paul. You've identified players like Moises Caicedo when he was a 19-year-old at Ecuadorian club Independiente del Valle. You brought him in for under $6 million. You sold him on to Chelsea for a British record-setting $146 million just 2 years later. You found Alexis McAllister at Argentinos Juniors for $9 million. You sent him to Liverpool for over 4 times that amount. Marc Cucurella in from Getafe for $18 million before Chelsea swooped. $68 million was sent to you in return after a single season. And you've mentioned data and analytics are at your core. It's what Tony Bloom knows as a betting man, a poker player. How do you use data properly, Paul?
Well, I think the first thing is that it's the foundation for all of our player recruitment. A lot of clubs will spend a lot of money having hundreds of scouts across the world looking at players and reporting back. We tend to take a different approach, which is first of all to start with a positional need. We actually need, for example, a left-sided defender. We then use our data to match up the attributes that the coach is looking for with the players that we think would be available at a certain price point in certain parts of the world. And then we use our own eyes on scouting to verify the data to make sure that what we believe the data is telling us is actually what it is telling us. And then it's a question of, can we afford that player? Will that player come to Brighton? Will we be able to get the deal done at the time we want to get it done? And of course, the final part of the jigsaw is the character profiling. Is that the sort of player that we want in our club? Is he going to fit with our culture? Is he going to fit with the dressing room that we already have?
So essentially, you are proactive rather than just the old reactive scouting model. And I know you also use Tony Bloom's company, Star Lizard, which sounds like one of David Bowie's worst nicknames, but is actually a data and analytics-based betting advisory system to help identify that first phase, the players. But how do you do that personality test? Really, how do you screen out the arseholes?
Yeah, that's the most difficult part because the first part is essentially an objective process. And obviously objective processes tend to be more successful when you're looking at numbers and data. But when you're looking at personalities, subjective processes have to come into it. You have to use a degree of subjectivity. Is this person, first of all, going to travel well to the UK? Are they going to be able to settle well in the UK? Culturally, is it a good fit for them? Do they have family? How are the family going to settle? Are the kids going to be able to get into school easily and adapt easily? And then it's a case of what kind of personality. Is this person a party animal? Are they a drinker, a smoker, a gambler? Are they the sort of guy that's going to come into the dressing room and be a positive influence or a negative influence? And the problem with all of those things is that to a large extent, they're subjective. What I might think is a good personality fit for the dressing room, the coach may have a slightly different opinion. Who I might think will gel well with the other players may not, because everyone's different and everyone reacts differently to each other. So to some degree, that last part of the process is the most tricky part. And, we're not perfect, Rog. We've had situations where not every player that we brought into the club has worked out. And very rarely do they not work out for technical reasons, because the objective part of the process is pretty solid. But the subjective reasons, the ability to settle in the UK, the ability to gel with teammates, the ability to have their family settle in the UK, sometimes they're factors that are largely outside of our direct control, and therefore they can have an influence on whether a player is successful or not.
I don't know if this is true, Paul, about how you actually do see the world, but I read one of FIFA's technical advisors. He said about Brighton that Brighton have, quote, 3 levels for the recruitment of players. There's players for the now and for the future, and players who are just for the future. And he also said Brighton don't really touch the now only players. And Paul, I don't know if that does vibe with how you see recruitment? If so, can you expand on it? What do you look for in that now and for the future category compared with those that are just like a fine bottle of wine to be laid down for a long, long time later?
Yeah, I mean, there's some truth in what's been said there. I mean, you know, the reality is you do need a combination of all those things. You do need some now players. So in our case, it's Danny Welbeck, Adam Lallana, James Milner, who are established high quality internationals who are very much for the now. They're not for the future because they're already in their mid-30s. So the now and the future bit is players that we think are almost ready but need some more development, and we'll get that by being in and around our first team immediately. And then the players for the future are those that we see real potential in, who will need more than just being around our first team now. They'll need to maybe go out on loan, either in England or in Europe, to play maybe at the next level down in order to get confident about their surroundings and their environment. And then when they're ready, we move them into our squad at some point in the future, and they become the now. And the key to our recruitment model is that we're constantly finding players for the future that we can bring in to replace the players that are now. And in an ideal world, what you're looking at is trying to bring in players well before you need them, because there's nothing worse than selling a player. Let's take Cucurella or Caicedo to Chelsea for a combined $200 million and then go out to the transfer market looking for their replacements, because everyone says, this is great. Brighton are on their way. Their pockets are bulging. Their wallet's bulging. We can actually take more money off them. So for us, it's important that we try and get in the players that we need for the future earlier and then be prepared to sell.
God, I have a very small brain, so when there's all this melding of future and now, essentially I've just heard you say that you've worked out a way to bend time and space and just move forward to the fourth dimension, which is ultimately, my whole concept is, can this be replicated? I think that's going to be very hard for you, Everton. But legendary Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger, he used to have a competitive edge. He used a program called Top Score, evaluated potential players, quantified the impact they could make. Actually developed it when he was at Monaco to compete with the likes of PSG, Marseille, and the fatter wallets in French football. He came to Arsenal. His scouting techniques were revolutionary, but they were very quickly mimicked by all the other teams in England. He lost that scouting advantage. Brighton haven't had that, evidently, yet. Season sensations have been Purvis Estupiñán from Villarreal, Simon Adingra from Danish club FC Northland, now young Facunda Buenanotte from Argentina's Rosario Central. How are Brighton kept evolving so other teams simply can't copycat your methodology and negate your scouting edge?
Well, first of all, we've got a data set that is exclusive to us and unique to us. That obviously helps. Our interpretation of that data, the algorithms we use to source through the data and to find the players is unique to us. But that's not to say that other clubs are not building up their own data sets and their own methodologies. And of course, it's a question of whose is more effective and whose will be more effective going forward. We're confident that our data is good, very good. But as I said before, we're not perfect. Human beings are exactly that. They're unpredictable. They're not always subject to objective processes in the way that we'd love them to be, because everyone's different. So it's not a perfect science, but it's a science that we try and improve upon every year. And every year that we improve, it means our competitors stay that little bit further behind. And, we've got to make sure that we continue to be different in the way we recruit. We've got to be prepared to go to different parts of the world and find players that other clubs are not looking at and not looking for. And then the second part of that process is actually hiring the best possible coaches, because once those players arrive, they don't just play for us and then get sold for higher sums of money. They have to be developed. They have to be coached. They have to be improved. They have to develop as individuals and as adults. And therefore, what we then sell is a very different player to the one we first bring in. And being prepared to sell at the right time is the second part of that trick, because most coaches will not want their best players sold ever, let alone at a time when the team is starting to really perform. So understanding our model and making sure the coach understands our model are two other very important factors in the way we work.
Selling the player, but also selling to the player at times to stay is a fascinating part of the concept you're laying out for me here. One of Brighton's youngest sensations, 19-year-old striker, Evan Ferguson. We had him on the show. He's a lovely, beautiful bloke. Opted to recommit to Brighton. despite interest from Liverpool, ton of Premier League big clubs. What's your pitch to Evan in that moment to make him choose to stay at the Amex over Anfield? Talk to me like I'm a goal machine like Evan, Paul. What do you say?
Well, first of all, clear vision for the club, strong culture, great facilities, world-class facilities, and most importantly for a young player, a pathway to play. A belief that young players can play at the highest level when they're ready. And, in a lot of cases, if you're going to a more established club, there's likely to be bigger stars ahead of you, players that expect to play every week. So for the younger players, not only are they competing with those bigger stars, but they've got to dislodge the bigger stars in order to get the platform that we ordinarily provide in our club, because we won't have those superstars because we don't have a wage structure that would support that. So for us, that combination of a clear vision, strong culture, great infrastructure and facilities, and a pathway to play is usually a winning combination. And we're not sort of not paying these guys a going rate. We're also paying them well as well. So if you put the whole package together, it's a pretty compelling one.
Quick aside, you recruit from areas in the world that are often overlooked: Ecuador, Paraguay, Japan. But you haven't signed a single player from the United States of America. Brighton have not had an American player since 2005. Paul, be honest, legit interested. How do you view our talent pool? And why have you never been tempted to invest in one of our boys?
Well, first of all, we just haven't been able to get deals done. And secondly, I think in terms of a talent pool, it's getting better all the time. And certainly going back to my time in Major League Soccer at the beginning of the 2010s, we were seeing then quite a strong interest and growing interest in the game. We were seeing more and more youngsters who were turning away from traditional North American sports to play football, to play soccer. That was exciting. I've seen that only grow and grow. We ourselves were in the United States last summer, played 3 matches in the United States, saw literally sold out stadiums everywhere we went, from Atlanta to New Jersey, right the way across to Philadelphia. We saw full stadiums. We saw lots of kids that loved the game, loved the sport, wanted to see us play. That gives me a huge amount of confidence and encouragement that the future of North American soccer is in good health. And with the World Cup coming, with leagues getting stronger, with the MLS getting bigger, with the leagues below that getting bigger and stronger, I'm seeing opportunities for North American players to make the jump across to Europe more and more in the future than ever before.
But you have gone in for American players. You've just not been able to pull them in.
Yeah, it's sometimes complex, just simply because of passports, visas, situations in terms of transfer fees and timings. As you know, the European leagues and the North American league are not aligned in terms of timing. So sometimes when we want to bring a player in the summer, that's the middle of an MLS season. Not ideal for an MLS club to let a prized talent go. We understand that. And of course, then you get to the transfer window in January. We try and avoid doing business in January if we can, because usually that tends to be a more expensive time of year for clubs to bring players in, because it's mid-season and they're usually looking to bring a player in at that point for a reason. Either they're struggling and they want to improve, or they've just suffered a bad injury and they need to replace. Neither of those are conducive to good negotiation on my side of the fence in that situation. So again, it's not ideal. So, we've tried in the past, we've looked in the past. I'm sure in the future, one of these deals will land at some point.
Amen. Back to today. Former Brighton manager Graham Potter led the Seagulls to a then record-setting points total and a then 9th place finish, which was the highest for the club ever. There's an oft-repeated story. Chelsea co-owner Todd Burley called you just after 7 o'clock in the morning to ask if he could talk to Potter after Chelsea had sacked Thomas Tuchel, and he ended up taking Graham Potter, 5 members of his staff. I think he might have grabbed a carton of milk and a couple of bagels too. Brighton rebounded by plucking Roberto De Zerbi from Shakhtar Donetsk, and he took the club next level to Europe for the first time in that 122-year history with his possession-based, attack-minded football. His success, in turn, has put him on managerial shortlists in no less than 3 countries. Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Liverpool all have jobs to fill. And you once told Sky Sports, Paul, you said as soon as a new manager comes in, you're already looking for the next one. What are the limits to Brighton's succession planning? Are you already preparing to lose a manager that you've not even hired yet?
Yeah, to some extent we have to, because I think with succession planning, first of all, it's a constant state. There's a sense, I think, in some organisations that you can look at your succession plan once a year. The problem is that the world's a dynamic place, and lots happen in those 365 days in between looking at your succession plan, if that's the way you work. So we tend to look at it almost weekly. We're constantly looking at the top 20, 25 positions in the club, both coaching positions and non-coaching positions, non-football positions. That's in addition to the player recruitment, which goes on all year round. And we're trying to anticipate when we're likely to lose key people. Is it because they've reached a ceiling with us and they can't progress? Is it because they've done so well that they're likely to be more attractive to other clubs and therefore higher salaries elsewhere? Is it because actually they themselves, from a family point of view, need to move and change? And in anticipating those moves, we're then looking at who would replace them. Where is the replacement? Are they already inside our building? Are they outside our building? If they're outside our building, can we get those people? If they're inside our building, are they ready to step up, or do they need some training and development to help them make that step? So it's a constant process. And if you have that mindset, then any kind of change that comes along, if it's Graham Potter 1 month into a new season because Todd Bowley's called, and you've got a new head coach that you know about, that you're comfortable will come in and do as good a job, if not better, and you can get that person, then the interruption to your club, the momentum loss is negligible. And actually what you can do is you can actually ride over the bump very easily. And it's no different if you lose an HR director or a finance director. If you've got someone lined up, ready to come in, you know that they're going to be at least as good, possibly better, then again, the loss of someone is an opportunity, not a threat. It can actually re-energize the organization, not take energy away. And if you have that kind of mindset, then you've got every chance of progress, because you don't see a loss of a key person as a major negative. You just see it as a potential positive. And I think that's the philosophy we've used for a number of years. We don't wait for a coach to be poached before we're looking at the next person coming in. That's not to say we want to lose Roberto De Zerbi. Far from it. We want to keep Roberto as long as we can, because he's a great coach and probably one of the world's best already. But we have to be cognizant that the better we do, the better he does, the higher profile we have, the more likely we are to potentially lose that person. And that's the circle of life in football, and particularly if you're a club of our size.
Yeah, I mean, for you, every key personnel is really just a baby tooth. Also, in your analysis, the more successful they are, the more likely you are to be able to replace them with somebody else of great quality, because it becomes a really burnished seat in world football. And you've said that the notorious RDZ has tried to push the team even harder, that he's tried to get it to stop putting any limitations on itself, which is amazing. He's asked, why are you just talking about top 10? Why aren't you talking about top 6? And honestly, I was blown away by this, because I am an Everton fan, as you know, Paul. I look at Brighton. I look at them as a remarkable idea incubator. I look at them as a strategic wonder. A club that set big goals for itself and gone out and tried to make them real. But when I heard you say that, thinking, why are we not top 6? Do you ever feel that you've been too conservative, or do you feel like you've identified what is a realistic ceiling, at least for right now?
No, but I don't think we've been too conservative. I mean, Roberto is exceptional in the sense that most coaches I've ever worked with prefer the chief executive and the owner to give them a little bit of air cover, not to set expectations too high, because, they need to have that pressure relieved, not added to. Roberto's different. I admire him for that, because he will constantly push us to be better publicly, because he believes it will force us to be better privately, which is not a terrible philosophy at all. We're pushing privately all the time to be better. But I don't have a problem, with him pushing us, because I think it does accelerate our development. I think in terms of ceilings, we don't believe we've got ceilings. What we do, however, believe is that there are a lot of clubs around us, slightly below us, one or two slightly above us already, who will constantly be pushing to be ahead of us. And in that sense, every year that goes by in the Premier League, this league becomes more and more competitive. It becomes harder and harder just to stand still, let alone keep moving forward. And I think the other challenge for us, when you finished 6th, as we did, our highest ever position in 123 years, the number of places above that pretty few. And the clubs in those places are huge. We're talking about state-owned clubs. We're talking about clubs with 100 years of success behind them, trophies bursting out of every cabinet in their stadium and their training ground. And therefore, to progress beyond sixth is even harder than to get into the Premier League, to stay in the Premier League, to get to the top 10, to get into sixth. To go from sixth to fifth or fourth or third or even higher is incredibly difficult. And so we're realistic about that. And that what we don't want to do is frighten our staff. We don't want to scare them into thinking that, that's our next goal, because of course we want to improve, but we're realistic about how difficult that's going to be. So there's always this balance and this healthy tension between the coach pushing us pushing ourselves, what's realistic, who we're up against, what kind of budgets we're up against, and therefore not to give ourselves a situation where if we don't finish in the top 6 this season or even in the top 8, it doesn't feel like a terrible disaster for us, because we're still on a journey, we're still learning, and our vision remains to be a top 10 Premier League club more seasons than not. And it remains to be a top 4 Women's Super League club more seasons than not. Just because we've achieved it twice doesn't mean to say we've achieved it.
So you're always looking up, and there are teams that have cheated the economics of football in the past. Lyon, Dortmund. I made a film with Southampton where I spoke to Les Reed at their peak when they were selling everybody, but still a youth academy like no other. And I said to him, these teams in the past, they have been picked apart from top to bottom by bigger clubs who treated them like a trout farm to overfish. How will that not happen to Southampton? He goes, it won't. But it did. And in the past 3 seasons alone, Brighton has sold Ben White, Dan Burn, Yves Bissouma, Mark Cucurella, Leandro Trossard, Alexis McAllister, of course, Moises Caicedo. After Liverpool and Chelsea played tug-of-war with him like 2 terriers on opposite ends of a surprisingly expensive rope chew. But Brighton haven't been diminished at all, or at least it looks like that. Indeed, they're almost like one of those lizards whose tails grow right back after it's been lopped off. Is it possible for Brighton to make one sale too many?
Well, first of all, I worked with Les and when I was back at the FA, and he's a fantastic coach. But I think our model's a little bit different. I think Southampton relied largely on their own academy. We rely to a degree on our own academy, but we're also competent at bringing in young players from different parts of the world and then developing them partly through our academy, partly through loans, partly through our own first team. And I think, therefore, we've got 2 sources of players coming through our system, which gives us the opportunity, first of all, to develop players for our own first team, which saves us on transfer fees. It also gives us an opportunity to bring players into our first team, make them better, sell them on for higher profits, which then enables us to start that cycle again. And we've also proved to be fairly good at blending those young talents with those wise old heads like Adam Lallana, Danny Welbeck, Pascal Gross, Lewis Dunn, all those players that we've got around, and more recently James Milner. And it's that combination of different recruitment strategies, some of them in parallel, and slightly different kind of thinking when it comes to blending the squad, and the ability to sell at the right time when we've got players in the door. Now, that's not to say again that we're completely infallible, because that wouldn't be the case. It doesn't mean to say that we're not going to be subject to bumps in the road and maybe a season here or there where we're not doing as well. We know that could happen, but we're pretty confident in our system, in our people, in our infrastructure, and in our philosophy and culture that we can keep moving in the right direction if the worst were to happen to us. And, football's cyclical, and, there are times when football clubs go through more difficult periods for lots of reasons. Injuries can affect you, even with the best squad. You can lose a coach and your replacement isn't available at the time you need them, and then you make a different hiring decision. There's so many things that can happen in top level sport that mean that your progress is not going to be in a straight line. There might be those bumps that we talked about. So we're realistic about that, and we're not scared of that. We're almost aware that could happen and need to plan for that to happen in order to try and stay as far ahead of the game as we possibly can.
Chelsea have brought, I believe, 11 players and staff members from Brighton in the past year and a half. Most recently, swiped your head of recruitment, Sam Jewell. I am fascinated. How do you feel when you watch Chelsea play? Do you feel Do you feel an emotional connection to them? These are your boys striving out there on the field, or do you just look at your bank account, see the reported $285 million, and just feel warm and smile?
Neither, Rog, to be honest, because I think, first of all, from the player's perspective, we always want them to do well. But as soon as they change colours, or they change, in our case, from blue and white stripes to Chelsea's all blue, they become Chelsea players. And from that point, they become rivals. They become our competitors. And so we can't feel an emotional attachment to the players other than as humans. And we want them to do well because we know them personally, and they've become friends over the years they've been with us. But in terms of the bank balance, equally, it's business. It's just a transaction. We don't feel any warmer towards Todd Bowley and his colleagues than we do any other club that we've done business with. Chelsea happen to have taken a lot of our people. They've paid us a lot of money, and that's business. We move on, and we've reinvested in some of that money in some players. We've reinvested it in our infrastructure. We've paid some money back to our owner. That's business.
Paul, all of what you've told me, A, it's quite fascinating. B, I do believe much of these lessons from Brighton are actually lessons about life that ultimately I know I'm going to take from this and think about in my own operation. But it's very lucid. It's really thought out. There's a measured strategy to everything. What's the last thing, the last big worry that woke you up in the middle of the night?
I think that the Premier League is becoming more and more competitive, not just every season, but almost every week. Teams are striving to be better in every way. They're investing millions of pounds in infrastructure to improve their training facilities. They're increasing the size of their stadiums to bring in more fans, which brings in more revenue, which enables them to spend more money on players. So it is becoming ever more competitive. It's becoming more and more difficult for clubs of our size to compete, which means that we've got to be smarter. We've got to hire the best possible people that we can. We've got to be prepared to do things that other clubs are not thinking of, and therefore we've got to think of them in the first place. So keeping me awake at night, maintaining our progress and our momentum is getting harder. And that's the challenge. That's one of the reasons why, I committed to a new contract here until 2030, because I love that challenge, and there's something in me that likes being the challenger, likes being the challenger brand, if I can put it into business speak, because it's quite a nice position to be in, where people are kind of looking over their shoulders at what you're doing, and that actually suits us as a culture. Yes, we've done well over the last couple of years, but we've still got a lot more we want to do, and we think we can do. But we know it's going to be hard to do that. And that in itself is an intellectual challenge as well as a sporting challenge. And I like that.
You talk about people looking at Brighton, analysing, copying. And I'm not just asking this as an Everton fan. I'm asking this as a gent who honestly craves true competition in football, which is why I wanted to have one of many reasons I wanted to have this conversation. Can what you have achieved at Brighton, can it be really replicated? How much is unique?
I think it can be, because I think we've seen over the years. I mean, we were the 21st club this season to progress through the different tiers of English football into a European competition. So there's already 20 clubs before us that have done what we've done. I think the English pyramid system, where you've got promotion and relegation, allows clubs to dream, allows fans to dream of doing what we've done. And as you said at the start, Rog, 26, 27 years ago, we were very, very close to going out of that system, going out of business altogether. We had no stadium, no training ground. Our fan base had diminished. We had an owner that wasn't prepared to put in any more money. And therefore, at that time for Brighton fans, where we are now would have seemed like a pipe dream, would have seemed like an impossible task, an impossible process to go through. But here we are, 26, 27 years later. It's been achieved, and we're hoping to maintain it. So for me, others can do it. Do it a different way, probably, because some of our processes are unique to us or different to us, and certainly unusual to us, and therefore hard to replicate. But there are other ways of doing this, and you've seen that with the 20 other clubs that have been on the journey that we've been on since the Premier League was formed. So I certainly wouldn't want to take that dream away from any other club, because it's one of the things that makes English football very, very special, and makes English fans very special, because they believe in that dream. But I hope that they stay a little bit behind us for a few more years to go.
You're an intense man of detail. I did love when I met with you. I think you told me you'd even scout the parking attendants at opponents' stadiums if you thought that would give Brighton a competitive edge. And at that time, you were still rebuilding the fan base, the relationship between club and community. And you decided to give every single newborn baby at the hospital a Brighton jersey as soon as they were born, which I have not forgotten. It's that kind of detail, that kind of dedication, that kind of just weaving change one human being at a time. But when you look back on your 12 years so far with this club, is there anything you've failed to achieve or that you've been disappointed in?
Well, it would have been great to get to the Premier League sooner than 5 years because, we sustained a lot of losses in those 5 years, which our owner is still bearing on our behalf. So that's, as a business person, that's always a little bit of a disappointment because no one likes to lose money, least of all someone who's charged as I am with running a business. I think, this season we would love to have gone further in the Europa League, our first season in European competition, because it was going so well. We won 5 out of our 8 matches in Europe, drawing 1 and losing a couple. But we sustained a lot of injuries, as other clubs have. But those injuries in the end, caught up with us and gave Roberto more, selection challenges than he perhaps deserved and the players deserved. So there's always regrets in sport. But the great thing about sport is there's always another season. There's always another match and you've got an opportunity to keep on improving. And, that's one of the things that keeps me going in this business. Here we are, it feels like we're only starting this season, but actually we're coming to the end of it already. We've only got 6-7 games to go. And, then we've got another summer break, another opportunity to regroup, reassess where we are, recalibrate our vision a little bit, improve our squad, and we go again. And that's the beauty of sport. And as every fan knows, you start every season with great optimism. The glass is always very much half full at the start of the season, and we're looking forward to that.
Do you though, Paul? So there is a new season coming. And I loved, there was a newspaper report that I read about Brighton's training ground, a sign up there that says, Team Brighton values, we never give up, which was the main idea. I think the mission statement for the club, the entire club strategy from 2020 to 2024. Paul, what are the values, the identity, the culture, the message for Brighton for the next 4 years? Can you sum that up in one statement?
Yeah, we have very clear values. We aim high. We treat people well. We try and exceed expectations. We act with integrity. We make things special and we never give up. That is us in a nutshell. We're not the biggest. We're not the best. We don't have all of the resources that some of our competitors have, but we have a huge amount of spirit and we have a very strong culture that binds us together. And that gives us the opportunity to compete at the highest level. And if I look back over, the last 7 years in the Premier League, we've beaten every one of those bigger clubs, in almost every case, home and away. Only Manchester City have we not beaten away from home. But Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham, Newcastle, Manchester United, we've beaten all of them home and away more than once. And, from that point of view, it shows that we are competing at the highest level. And we beat Manchester City once, but we always give Manchester City a good game. And they are, at the moment, the best team in the world. Liverpool and Arsenal are pretty close, but City remain the best team in the world for sure. And they've got the best coach in the world. So for us to be able to go toe to toe with teams like that shows that spirit and that culture and those strong values and that belief does give you a chance in professional sport, even if you don't have the same quality squad or the same resources.
I just wrote that motto down, and it is I hope it's a creed for us all to live by. Paul, last question. Genuinely love speaking to you. Could have gone on all bloody afternoon, but it does seem whenever you give an interview, and I do try and listen whenever you speak, there's always one commenter underneath the YouTube or whatever Talk Sport post to say that he emailed you when he was 14 years old to ask your advice for having a good career. And they always say several years later, he's followed your advice and is, quote, loving life. So if someone asks you today for the secret to success, Paul Barber, CEO of Brighton and Hove Albion, what would you tell them?
work hard, believe in your dreams, follow your dreams. And, for me, it's always been important to reply to people that send those kind of messages. I remember when I was a kid writing to my club growing up, Tottenham Hotspur, and never getting a reply. And, that's pretty devastating if you're a kid and the club's your idol. The players and the club are everything, and you don't get a reply. It's pretty difficult. So I always try and reply and always try and give some kind of sense of what it takes to do this job. And it's not rocket science. I didn't have the best education, but I've worked hard. I followed my dream and I believe in my dream. And I've been lucky along the way, as I said right at the start, to have some really good mentors, some good people that push me and encourage me. And I try and do the same with others. And I think that's a good philosophy to have in life, whether you work in professional sport or whether you work in any industry. If you can give someone a helping hand, you should do.
Work hard, believe in the journey, team spirit, team culture, exceed expectations. Those are the code words. Honestly, a code I do believe to live by. Paul Barber, you're a magnificent human being. I've really enjoyed this time. To you, to Brighton and Hove Albion, up the Seagulls.
Thanks very much, Rog. It's been a pleasure to join you today. Thank you.
Courage.